That was probably unnecessary. Yeah, so this is a bit of an impromptu review, I've got to say. Bubble is an anime movie on Netflix, produced by Wit Studio, directed by Tetsuro Araki of Attack on Titan and Iron Fortress fame, and written by, apologies if I get this wrong, Gen Urobuchi of Psycho Pass, Madoka Magica, and Fate Zero. So, a fairly stacked team. It takes place in a post apocalyptic but really abandoned Tokyo several years after bubbles from presumably space rained down upon the world, then conglomerated in the Japanese city after Tokyo Tower just sort of exploded, causing this massive gravity manipulating pulse that created a bubble around Tokyo a la Simpsons movie. And inside of that bubble, gravity abnormalities occur, causing black holes, whirlpools, and floating debris even years after the catastrophe. And those living in the bubble, of their own choosing, you can leave at any point in time, investigate the matter and compete in highly dangerous parkour races for fuel and rations. So this movie's a bit weird. Bubble follows the parkour team of Blue Blaze, helmed by some kids, a lady old enough to drink but young enough to take pass at said kids, a former parkour master, and Hibiki, our resident not a team player, parkour prodigy, slight edge boy, orphan boy with a crop top and suffering sort of from hyperacusis, a condition of audio hypersensitivity. Again, apologies if I said that wrong. Alongside Hibiki, as lead of this movie, is the bubble girl named Uta, a quirky, I'm doing air quotes, slightly feral personification of an alien bubble entity who saves Hibiki from drowning and who also shares a connection with him since they both can hear a special sound slash song coming from the gravity entity at the center of Tokyo Tower. And there you go, a weird, possibly high concept post-apocalyptic love story about what, Stella? Oh yeah, sorry. It's also an allegory for the Little Mermaid, as the movie really likes to point out a lot. So, did Netflix actually help a great, awe-inspiring film with strong characters, heart and soul, and jaw-dropping visuals? No, no, it's Netflix. Bubble isn't a bad movie, but it's not the movie it thinks it is or tries to be. The most prevalent issues in the movie Bubble are surrounded with its plot and its settings and its characters, and I know that's a lot of it, but there's a reason for that. The setting is an abandoned, slightly post-apocalyptic Tokyo, but really not too apocalyptic. Everybody there seems to be pretty happy. There's plenty of food, plenty of water. The city's partially flooded, but it's pretty beautiful too, which I will give props for the movie for not relying on the dreary type of post-apocalyptic world. But it's a bunch of kids living in this place, specifically Blue Blaze, living in a research boat that looks a little bit like a military vessel, floating on the water. The setting of Tokyo itself is littered with gravitational abnormalities that sort of hinder life a little bit, but it's mainly just appearing for plot purposes and for when parkour happens in the movie. They're not really much of a danger until about the final act. And while the parkour around the city is an interesting way to move around a partially broken and floating Tokyo, it's not quite as amazing as I think it could be. Something about the direction of the movement and the heavy use of CG backgrounds, while appropriate and I understand helpful in the animation process, does take you out of the scenery a little bit, and something about the palette of the whole movie was a little off to me, and that could just simply be a personal preference. But like I said, in Tokyo, there's a lot of parkour going on, and it's used for essentially bartering or getting resources from other teams. There's specifically about 4 teams for parkour that are shown in the movie prominently, and they do everything from rations, fuel, to occasionally people from the parkour terrorists. The plot itself of the movie is pretty straightforward. Tokyo, like I said before, is abandoned, and the whole area is sort of under the control of this gravitational bubble eldritch horror monster that hangs out in Tokyo Tower. And this monster spawns this little bubble girl called Uta, who takes the form of a famous pop idol who is unnamed and who saves our main character, Hibiki, from drowning. And there's a lot in this movie about focusing on Uta and Hibiki's relationship and Uta's interactions, and eventually parkour, and a little bit of hints and talks about the bubble entity itself, and some other larger things like the golden ratio, like life, death, and rebirth, and some themes that, to be honest, don't come up in great detail in this movie, despite the fact that they are mentioned, and despite the fact that stuff like The Little Mermaid is heavily referenced in this movie, despite the fact that I don't think it really helps with the movie a lot. But we'll focus a bit more on the plot again. Eventually, Uta and Hibiki are separated. Uta herself, she cannot touch Hibiki, or else she turns into bubbles. So she is eventually, after a specific race where she loses her arm, but nobody realizes it for whatever reason, the entity at the center of Tokyo Tower calls Uta back, and she must leave. And then the entity begins to destroy Tokyo again in another bubble cataclysm. And then Hibiki and Blue Blaze go to save her, and Hibiki drowns a bunch of times and does a bunch of cool parkour stuff. And eventually, Uta, spoiler alert, dies, saving Hibiki one last time. And in doing so, she fully dissolves and almost reprograms the eldritch entity, who is supposed to be her sister, who tries to grapple at her with also a weird golden black manifestation of like a copy of her. But anyway, that entity is essentially overwritten into another Uta, and while she is gone physically, her bubbles still appear and still follow Hibiki around as Tokyo is eventually rebuilt, because the bubble itself is now gone. Oh, and just to clarify, they could always leave the bubble, they just didn't. So that's sort of the plot, as well as a very heavy emphasis on Hibiki and Uta being in some sort of love relationship. And it's a weird thing, because as much as they want this plot to work, it kind of doesn't. Mainly because in the heavy, heavy emphasis on emotional beats and music in the story, don't move you because you don't really care or know a ton about the characters. Very little of the side characters in this story matter. Really, only Hibiki and Uta matter to any sort of extent, and only Hibiki is given somewhat of a backstory. He has a severe audio sensitivity disorder that is eventually basically done away with halfway through the story, despite the fact that it is supposed to be his major part of his backstory. It almost seems like his mother essentially abandoned him because of that. I don't even know how he ended up in Tokyo Tower in the first place at the beginning of the story, right before the cataclysm happened. But that's a weird spot for me, because audio sensitivity doesn't seem like it would be any grounds for parents to be that devastated. Literally, his disorder is only the audio sensitivity portion. There's nothing else. And for some reason, his mother seems absolutely devastated that he has to wear some headphones occasionally. And I don't feel too bad about making fun of this in this movie, because again, they deal away with that incredibly quickly by the third act, or halfway through the second act. And so they don't really give it a whole lot of thought, honestly, compared to like Ranking of Kings, where the main character's disorder is both a part of the story, but also not just brushed away. It's more of it doesn't matter. I think Bubble could have done a lot more with that. But other than that, we don't know why Hibiki likes other things that he likes. We don't know why he's much of a loner, other than that he doesn't like loud noises at the beginning of the movie. We don't know why he likes gardening, which he does for a little bit, like they give him some color, and then it's not really discussed much. And we also don't know why he's so good at parkour, assuming he is an orphaned boy. It just is what it is. And for whatever reason, Uta is really infatuated with him, because at the beginning of the cataclysm, he noticed her singing, praised her for it. She went up to touch him, and then the tower exploded. And Hibiki's come to the conclusion it's because he made the other bubbles angry, which again, I don't get. It's a little bit of a weird inciting incident. But we don't know much about that. We don't even know really what the Eldritch Bubble entity from space wants. It just exists, and then it tries to destroy Tokyo, We don't know if it's some sort of collective. We don't know if it's a bunch of separate bubbles. We don't even know what Uta's place in that is. All we know is that she's a little quirky and she likes the Little Mermaid, which I think is a really missed opportunity for the ability to do that, what other movies do, which is take something non-human and introduce it into being human. But they try to have these emotional beats of, oh, you helped me find myself. Oh, you mean so much to me, when it's just two people who share some screen time together, and maybe the only chemistry they really have is that they like to do in sync parkour dance moves as they do important plot beats, and that's about it. And then it ends up with her dying at the end, and it's not satisfying in my opinion. Music and the visuals and all that, it just doesn't hit for me. And it might hit for other people, but it just doesn't for me. And I think that's because what really took me out of the story and these little things, these little flourishes Bubble tries to do, is that there are about 3 other properties that I can think of at the moment that do what they do, not as a whole, but separately, better, that I've watched recently. Belle, an anime loosely based on Beauty and the Beast, has a unique take on that story without hammering you over the head with the fact that it is a take on Beauty and the Beast. You have Suzu trying to open up to herself, her mother having died when she was younger, and having her carry on both her passion for music and also her understanding of why sometimes giving up a piece of yourself to save others who you don't know is important. And that is really well woven into a Beauty and the Beast type theme with the dragon and Belle. And I think overall, Belle does that portion, that fairy tale portion, and even that self-discovery portion a whole lot better. As for the parkour and that type of stuff, I think a movie like this, I felt like should have put more emphasis on parkour, considering how big of a part of the movie it is for its action, because it's such a unique thing. But they don't really emphasize parkour more on just some cool moves and such. And maybe I'm not the person to talk about parkour because I don't do it. I make YouTube videos, but it's just something compared to the anime Skate the Infinity, which is an absurd love letter to skating as a whole that does some really amazing things. And even though I am not a skater myself, for some reason watching that, I really felt like it was an honest and wholehearted praise of the sport, as absurd as it gets at times. And it seemed like the people who made it really loved the sport and really watched all that stuff. And I don't know if I get that from the animation for the parkouring. Something about it just, I don't know. And again, this could just simply be my unfamiliarity with parkour, but it almost seems like this might have been something better as like a video game than a movie. I don't know, something about it just didn't translate for me. Maybe it's the absurdity, maybe it's the fact that the broken Tokyo and the floating towers and how gravity works and just sort of whatever it seems like the movie wants it to work, maybe took me out of it. And then lastly, I think comparing to another WIT property that I've talked about a few times, Vivi Fluoride Eye Song, which is another property that has a huge emphasis on music, on self-discovery, on something that's not human, living almost a human life or finding purpose. And some of the animation is from Vivi is incredibly similar to Bubble, which makes sense because it's with Studio. And that is in what I like to point out, specifically the detailed heavy close-up shots of faces. In Bubble, there's a specific shot I remember, and they do it a few times, of looking up on Uta's face, but one of them is when Uta is at the ship for the first night, and she sneaks into Hibiki's room while he sleeps, and she looks at him, tries to touch his face, doesn't, and then touches her lips in a sensual way, and it focuses on her face, and I was expecting her to say something, or to do something emotionally poignant, or relevant to the plot, and she doesn't. It's just a way to show that there's something between them more than there is. And then I think to one of the most striking scenes in Vivi Fluoride Eye Song, where they do that very same close-up, that look, which I'm pretty sure they started in Vivi because it's a good way to show the human emotion and face of Vivi, as well as get a really good look on her fluoride eyes, which are inherently robotic and inhuman. And that detailed look at both of them is incredibly striking. But the image I'm remembering from Vivi is when, and content warning here, is when the doctor, who she meets in one of the episodes, and she's trying to help, and beware, Vivi's mission, her purpose as a robot, is to make sure everybody is happy with her singing, and she can't do that if people die. And the doctor in front of her commits suicide, and his blood is literally and metaphorically on her hands and on her face. And that dissonance of her prime directive and his death causes her to have a mental breakdown and completely go insane. And she's sitting there, and that look at her face of absolute horror, and as she just sort of spirals away from what she originally was, that is an emotionally devastating and poignant part in the story that colors the rest of the series. And you just don't get that in Bubble, in those specific shots. They're just emphasis to really show you how cute Uta looks or how sensual she looks at points in time. And I don't know, something about that feels wrong. That type of hyper focus, while not everybody liked it in Vivi, I did, because it gave such a contrast to what was going on around, that really that dissonance with what she was feeling or what the characters were seeing when they were looking at Vivi really made that work for me. And it doesn't work here. And same with some of the action, same with some of the set pieces. Um, it's not bad by any means. It's really good animation, but its direction and what I feel like, it doesn't quite live up to that. And I think more importantly, the music of Bubble, which there's a specific song that plays constantly throughout the movie, and you'll notice it. It doesn't have any lyrics. It's a song that both Uta and Hibiki can only hear because of Hibiki's condition and because Uta's part of the Bubble Collective. That type of music, it plays, and it plays at the end. And after watching Belle, and specifically after watching Vivi, seeing the end of this movie, and she evaporates into bubbles, but she thanks Hibiki for helping her find herself, and there's a song playing in the background. And as much as I wanted to feel something there, I did, but it felt hollow. Essentially, music is a big piece in both this anime and in Vivi. To be fair, more in Vivi because the main character is an idol, but still, there's the haunting song that you hear throughout Bubble, and at the very end, all I could think about was that Bubble's haunting song, which did catch me at the beginning of the movie, lost me at the end because it had no meaning. Not that I could piece together. You can't call a movie based on The Little Mermaid and have it just be a love story between, Hibiki and Uta, but not really, and then not have to be able to focus on it, and then not have the same, I feel, love for parkour that a lot of people have. You can't have all of that, no lyrics, no consequences at the end, and make me really care about it. It sounded nice, it was sung briefly, it feigned emotion, and that's it. I'm not going to remember Bubble's song a week down the line, let alone a month. But in Vivi's final song, which parallels, so spoiler alert, parallels Bubble a lot, because Vivi also dies at the end in a specific way. I don't know. It's a heartfelt farewell to everything that everything that accumulated throughout the rest of the story. It's a farewell to life, to a purpose fulfilled after decades of searching and hardship. It's a hopeful song for the changing future, little by little, as Vivi slowly shuts down on the very stage she starts her journey on. And that's a song that makes me emotional every time I hear it. And I think that real raw emotion and those characters who you empathize and you see with and you really want to succeed is just missing from Bubble. So I don't want to be too harsh on this movie. Here are the scores for Bubble and the other properties I mentioned. I will not say Bubble was a bad movie. I'm probably a little overly harsh on it, but compared to some of the other stuff I've seen and compared to what I think Bubble could have been, it's missing a lot. I think this definitely could have easily been a 7 out of 10 had they been able to narrow their focus more or show more passion in specific portions of the movie and maybe not rely so heavy on the Little Mermaid, because to be honest, that's what Uta mainly talks about, and it just doesn't resonate, especially to be fair with me, because although I know the basic plot beats of Little Mermaid, they've actually never seen the movie, which yeah, I know it's bad, but I don't think not having seen this movie or not having seen all of Little Mermaid should affect my enjoyment of this movie, because I also haven't seen Beauty and the Beast, and I still liked Belle, so that argument doesn't work on me. Anyway, Thank you so much for watching. If you disagree with me, I would love to hear why. If you love this movie, that's great. For some reason, I feel like this movie had some sort of different direction, especially with the Undertakers in it. I feel like maybe the script for it was changed about midway through because there's pieces in here that would seem to flow better under a different series or even maybe a television series, but that doesn't matter too much. But again, thank you so much for watching. If you want to subscribe, it means a ton to us, and I will keep putting out more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it this far, I am Lachlan Star Eyes, and I'll see you next time. Bye.